my understanding is basically in 67, basically 3 different countries were like, we're going to come and fucking shit on these fucking losers. And then somehow in 6 days, Israel like tripled the amount of territory it had because it dominated all 3 invaders so unbelievably harshly.
Yeah.
Now, they advanced a little bit past their, well, they advanced quite a bit past the prior borders, although some of it, arguably, with some justification. So, for instance, like, is it the Suez Canal that Egypt was trying to shut down shipments through? And then I think there were attacks that were coming from Jordan that Israel didn't like. So, do you think that's like not okay, or should Israel have been forced to give the land back afterwards, or what is your?
I mean, they did give some of the land. They gave the Sinai back to Egypt. Yes. So Egypt has the Suez Canal now.
Yeah.
Do you think they shouldn't have given that back?
Well, didn't they give it back under the condition of demilitarization and no more blockades going through the Suez? Wasn't that?
They basically made peace with each other. Yeah.
Yeah. But for the rest of it,
they haven't given the Golan Heights back.
Should they have to?
Okay. So, fuck you. Okay, so first of all, I was like brushing up on most of this stuff, but I'm going backwards. So I'm at like the 80s now in the last, so I was going to do like the rest.
I just came from the Ottoman Empire and I'm rushing forward through history. So yeah, tell me,
Okay, so you don't think Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank are entitled to a state or self-determination?
Yeah, I mean, they can have a state somewhere, but like, are they entitled to one? I mean, like, no more than the Kurdish people are, no more than the well, I guess Armenia is a country. I'm sure there are other nomadic people, the Romani. I don't know if they're entitled to ones, but like, it feels like post World War I, we talked about a lot of people having quote unquote states. They tried to make some borders. Some people didn't like it. They revolted. Turkish people, they carved out other lands. Israel was one where people decided like, okay, well, they get like an itty bitty place. People still didn't like the itty bitty place that Israel had, and a whole bunch of people tried to invade them. They fought back. They got some more borders. I don't know. Here's a question. Actually, maybe you can answer this on a macro level. What do we mean when we say who deserves land?
I think, so looking at that region, I would imagine who deserves land would, that's a really difficult question.
Yeah.
I think it just depends on, I'd say right now the justification for Palestinians deserving land, if you want more specific, or even back then, is that Palestinians don't really have a very good time under Israeli rule, right?
Not as on me, but like, can they just go somewhere else?
Where? No, they can't. Like, they go to Lebanon, they get treated even worse, arguably. They went to Jordan. I mean, they got treated worse in Jordan as well. They got, like, because a bunch of them were deported from Jordan. Where else can they go?
Well, I mean, who do you think has a worse time in Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria? Do you think it would be Palestinians, or do you think it would be Jewish people?
Of course it'd be Jewish people, yeah. That's why there are like double-digit Jews in all those countries, yeah. But again, like, if you're in the... So do you know, did you get to 48 in the ethnic cleansing of Palestine?
Nope, I haven't gotten to that part yet.
Okay, so...
That sounds like a pretty big deal, though.
Like, around the time when Britain was like promising land to the Israelis, I think that territory was like 6% Jewish. It was a very small number of Jews living there. A bunch of them came over from after like persecution with Nazi rule in North Africa, Middle East, and obviously Europe.
Yeah, so I got to the first Aliyah, all the different promises. The Balfour Declaration is like a thing that we read fucking over the past week, all that shit. And the British people and everybody else trying to figure out like who's going to administer what lands in the Middle East and all this shit.
Yeah, and then after World War II, you've got like a growing Jewish population there with land that's getting given to them by the British Empire. Sometimes I think even dispossessing Palestinians in the process. But then the way that they achieved that state was like that 48 war involved, before actually the war started, that involved Israeli paramilitaries going to people's houses and just kicking them out. There were like 30 massacres. They poisoned the wells with typhoid on purpose. They murdered people. They drove people out. So I think that's like 750,000 Palestinians get kicked out, mostly end up in West Bank, or they end up in fucking Lebanon or Jordan. And then in response to that, Jordan goes and seizes East Jerusalem, they kick out the Jews who live there, and the Jewish quarter gets destroyed. Then the Arab countries, who are very anti-Semitic at the time, start closing Jewish bank accounts. There's violence against Jews who live there, and then as a result, like 800,000 Jews either get chased out, or they get fucking airlifted by Israel themselves, or they just go there because they're not enjoying life in Middle East and North Africa.
Just because, I've come from like both ends right now. So like I'm up through World War I think, and the Balfour Declaration, and then I've read a decent bit now on that 6-Day War. But the period between like 1920 and the 6-Day War was in 1967. I don't have much info on yet, so I'm wikiing this because I obviously haven't read any of the ethnic cleansing stuff. Do you know anything about like this 1936 to 1939 Arab revolt in Palestine?
Yeah, so there were like there's the massacre in Hebron. I think that was 20s though, and then there's like so there's fighting on both sides.
Yeah, okay. All right.
Hebron was when Palestinians massacred Jews. So there's a lot of fighting going on both sides. There are Palestinian militias who don't like it that hundreds of thousands of Jews are coming to what they consider to be like their land, and especially in the dawn of like nationalism. On the same end, there are lots of right-wing Israelis who are very unhappy because they think Britain owes them a lot more than they're getting. They thought Britain was going to give them like Jordan and historic Palestine. And then they find that their claim is shrinking, so they start attacking, they start bombing fucking British buildings, the King David Hotel, and I think
also,
it was...
Wait, can you give me like 20 seconds real quick?
Yeah.
Real quick, Destiny, the Arabs did attack Israel in 1967. Israel caused a spell, was the blockade of the Straits to Tehran. There was no military attack by Arabs. It was a preemptive strike. Yeah, but I'm pretty sure they were getting ready to fight. Like everybody, I think, recognized that there was about to be a fight brewing, because I don't think you could close that canal and not have a fight eventually break out. But okay, sorry. Okay, so you were talking about how...
You blame the Soviets for that, but sorry, go on.
Sure, okay. So here's something that I noticed for World War I, and then going onwards, is there's always kind of this trope of like the British, and truly I guess everybody fucked up all the borders in the Middle East, and that's why like nobody's happy. But as I look at like how the Ottoman Empire administered its territory, and then you look at like the large collection of ethnic and religious people that lived in that area, would there ever have truly been a good way to divide that territory without it being like a mega country like the Ottoman Empire?
No. I don't think there was a right way to do it. I don't think the way they did it was perfect, but yeah, they're because so many of these because these countries, even just down to their constitutions, are just so unstable. Like Lebanon's like the perfect example. They have this system where it's supposed to be balanced, right? Like 30 Christian, 30 Sunni, 30 Shia, and like the Christians always get the presidency. The Sunnis always get the prime minister, I think, and the Shias always get the speaker of the house, something like that. And the result of that is that like you just get one of the most racist, like xenophobic populations in the world, because anytime like a demographic comes in, say Palestinians, they get very fucking aggressive towards them, and that's been a problem ever since. So yeah, like, but I don't really know if there was a right way to do it, but I think the problem with what the British were doing in Palestine was that they. My timeline right, but they were making promises on both sides. Yeah. Whilst and both sides were very unhappy with it. Like that's why both sides resorted to terrorism during that situation. But I think with Palestinians and them deserving like what you would say like a state is because the problem with the difference between like the Palestinian problem and the Jewish problem is that the Jewish refugee problem from pre-48 kind of eventually got solved. Like they found Israel, or they live in America or Europe. The Palestinian one didn't. They don't have statehood like in Lebanon. They barely get it in surrounding Middle Eastern countries either. And the cause of that, a lot of them, I think it's like millions of them being displaced now, is traced back to the founding of Israel. And if you're talking about why doesn't Israel get all the West Bank and Gaza, well, that's kind of, I think that's more or less been their goal since the 2000s. But look, how do you achieve that, right? You expand settlements, violence, and that's like the way that they've been going, and you snub any kind of peace process, because throughout the early 2000s, Palestinians actually were open to at least like 3 or 4 different peace deals that the far right in Israel just completely rejected. So, or the right in Israel just rejected. So, I don't know. I think that would probably be the best question to you, is that if Israel does that, if they get Gaza and the West Bank, or just the West Bank, then you're adding millions of people to the Israeli population, Palestinians, You
well,
either
that's
deport
always
them
the issue
or,
with the one state solution, as I think a lot of people in Israel aren't too keen on that, because then you're dramatically expanding your voting population of Arabs, essentially, right?
Yeah, well, that's why they left Gaza, because they didn't want to have a situation where, like, you have 1 or 2 million people who are Palestinian that the Israelis are governing. Yeah, that's why they pulled out of Gaza.
Do you think, here's a question, and again, I'm not at these peace deals or anything yet. Do you think that the Arab nations in the Middle East want there to be a peace deal between Israelis and Palestinians?
I think they did. There was one that was called the Arab Normalization Initiative and Peace Initiative in 2002, where the Arab League offered to normalize relations with Israel in exchange for Israel. I think it was like recognizing the right of return for Palestinians, but like in a kind of negotiated way, granting statehood to Gaza and the West Bank. But this was when Sharon, the right-wing Israeli, was in power, and he just said no. So I think at the time maybe, but now I think generally Arab nations have kind of not really given a fuck about Palestinians. Like,
well, I get because it seems
Jordan definitely doesn't. Like, yeah.
Yeah, I guess my question is because I wonder if, like, and again, I'm not at this part yet, but like, I wonder, like, does Palestine not serve as like a useful proxy essentially for like Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran to essentially fuck with Israel, like for the goal of eventually, I don't know now if they think they can ever destroy Israel as a country, but
yeah, yeah. So Hezbollah, I think, are kind of struggling for relevance now compared to the early 2000s, because it's been a while since Israel occupied Lebanon, like 25 years almost. And that's why Hezbollah are now currently like just firing pot shots into Israel, because that's their only way of keeping relevant. With Hamas, I mean, Hamas basically, I'm not going to say Israel created Hamas, that's kind of bullshit, but like they do owe their success, I think, to the failure of any peace process between Israelis and Palestinians in the 90s and 2000s. I think that failure made Hamas inevitable, but I don't think Hamas would be that popular if there was like some option amongst secular nationalist Palestinians to get some kind of recourse with Israel. Like if there was like any attempt to maybe even just stop the settlements, if they could negotiate that, I think Hamas's relevance would plummet. But we're not seeing that, because I think whether they know it or not, the more hardline Israel is with Palestinians in the West Bank, the more popular Hamas becomes in Gaza. Yeah. So that's what I would ask you is like, if you think, why doesn't Israel get all of it? Is like, how do you achieve that without just another ethnic cleansing in the West Bank, or just second-class citizens, right? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Which is what I think a lot of people want. I think people who support that one-state solution on the Israeli side will say, like even liberal Zionists will say this. They'll say it's fine, but not if Palestinians can vote. Like,
yeah, of course.
And that's insane, because then you just have like a de facto apartheid state, which is going to cause, actually, there's an argument I've heard actually that this is really bad for Zionism as well, because the Zionist dream kind of dies when like 35, 40, 50% of the population are Palestinian.
Does it?
Yeah.
I guess it kind of does. I think the worry is that like if they start voting against you, and they start to slowly take over your place, then yeah, but... And
especially if like the problem is that so much of Israel is like that ethnic cleansing thing is probably the most important like part of the history, I think, for the Palestinian end, because so much of like what we call the Jewish state is literally built on like mass graves and like demolished villages, right? Like 500 villages just like wiped out, and that's a crisis that's never been solved. So yeah, like, but so that's why I think that, even just going from like a very cold perspective, I think like the idea of Palestinian statehood is a much more preferable option to the alternative.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. I think there's like an interesting international question of like who's owed a territory, who deserves a territory. That's an interesting question. I don't even know if there's an internationally agreed upon answer to that. So, but
no, I don't. There definitely isn't.
Sure. Wait, think about this answer really, really carefully, okay? So you don't mess it up.
What answer am I thinking about?
What the f***? You're supposed to be
the one about who deserves nation.
Yeah, like who's owed land, essentially. Yeah. How do we even figure that out?
I think we did. Do you remember when Russia attacked Ukraine, and that Kenyan dude was like in the UN saying that like none of these borders, especially in post-colonial worlds, are perfect.
Yeah.
We just have to kind of take what was roughly established, probably through some conflict at some point, and then just try and uphold that, and then just try and work with it. So even if you compare like the UN partition plan in 47 to the post 67, like Palestine already shrunk like massively, and even some people would say that, like, given how many Jews were there before 40s, they got quite a lot anyway. I think it's just like a pragmatic thing. I don't think there's any like moral, like people having like a moral or like internal connection to the land. I think it's just like pragmatically, you've got displaced population, you've got a population that's been living under occupation for decades in this piece of land. They share this like demographic, and I think it's like, and there are international treaties on it that could be like ratified. So I think it's just a pragmatic thing mostly. I don't know if that's very satisfying.
I realistically think that's what it is, right? Like some guy in my kick chat was like, Palestinians have been there for thousands of years. I was like, yeah, but so have Native Americans, right? But they're never getting the United States back. And then the borders of Europe have changed like constantly.
Because it sounds like with, because otherwise there are people who will also say like, you know, why doesn't, if that's the case with the north of the United States, why doesn't Russia deserve Crimea, right? Because whatever happened in the past, however immoral it was, it's now majority Russian, and most of them want to be part of Russia, or potentially. Sure. So, but yeah, the problem is that it's pragmatic, right? It's the precedent that you're setting. It's that
we're going to go around and start rewriting borders on every country based on
of course, So were you more sold on the idea of Israel getting everything than you were on like peace process or two states or one state? Or
I haven't read through all the different solutions yet. My initial takeaway, because I've even repeated a lot of this to be fair, because I'm retarded, but like basically what I'd heard for a long time was that Great Britain f***ed everything up in the Middle East by drawing stupid borders, and then for some reason Jewish people basically got a country in the 40s, and since its inception, the United States has been like ardently defending Israel from all foreign attacks and invaders, while Israelis indiscriminately genocide the poor Arab people around them. That's kind of just like I feel like that's like the broad story that I've been told over and over again, but then I guess as I read more, it seems like it's a lot more complicated. Like the Ottoman Empire was huge and sprawling. I don't know if I already said this, I don't know if there was any good way to cut up the territory of the Ottoman Empire after it fell. Doesn't seem like there was any good way to do it. It seems like I think from the 40s to the 60s, Israel we sold them weapons, but it's not like we didn't help them in that 6-day war, right? Although I know that a lot of Arab people like to accuse us of that they had secret help from the United States. Although they literally blew up one of our ships on accident, or if you're a Nazi on purpose, I guess. But
I don't know much about the details, but I think wasn't it like the Israeli Air Force was already quite advanced, and didn't they just go and like take out Egypt one before anything could like take off, and then they call it the 6-day war, but it was really won in like a few hours. But
here's something that seems interesting. It happens with the Ukrainian war as well. I guess in some ways this is really intuitive, and it's so intuitive it seems probably impossible, but it actually goes back to being really intuitive. It seems like the training and the actual combat effectiveness of your troops is either as important or more important than the actual equipment and everything you're given. So like when it comes to like Ukraine versus Russia, we just read like a huge write-up yesterday on like how the front lines are going. And apparently it seems like one of the big things that Ukraine is having an issue with isn't necessarily with even micro training or equipment. It's being able to execute like sophisticated strategies on like a broad level. That's a very, very difficult thing to do in like a combat heavy environment. And it seemed like Israel took a lot of their training and everything like ultra super like anal seriously. So like just in the little bit I've read, like it feels like at the beginning of that 6-day war, like the whole intro to that war was like did you see the second Top Gun movie?
No.
It was like hundreds of fucking Israeli jets flying like below radar and anti-air defense coverage to like go to Egypt and literally destroy like every single fucking plane and kill every single pilot that they had before the war even started, and it was like just yeah. So Israel was like guaranteed air support for basically the entire conflict because like I think Egypt had like 4 planes left. They were just like completely obliterated. And then apparently like Israel was like super anal about like they could get a plane out in a mission, they could come back. They were like training their dudes like NASCAR people to like refit their shit almost instantly. So whereas other Arab nations were flying 1, maybe 2 sorties a day with a plane, in Israel they could fly 4 sorties a day on a single plane. So just like the amount of shit they were doing. So like a lot of the training and military discipline. And I mean, if you look at like the total troops deployed, it was like twice as much on the Arab side versus the Israel side. And I think the Arabs lost like what, like 50 times more people. Like it was just an insane, yeah, I don't know. And it feels like, and again, this was with not limited, this was with no U.S. help. I'm pretty sure a lot of these other Arab countries were literally using some weapons platforms bought by the Soviets, and I think the British as well. So it's not like it was like all of Europe was helping Israel. I don't know how. I have to read more getting up to the 6 Day War. I don't know how Israel was so combat ready or prepared, unless they literally are God's chosen people. But I mean, it seems like they fought hard and they won their shit, but...
I mean, there's a reason that war is like a big part of Israeli nationalism, right? Yeah.
I mean, I can understand it, though.
Narrative, yeah.
But I mean, it also seems like if we look at like how unfair that was, in terms of like Israel like owning all of the territory, like Turkey arguably carved out their country as well from that, right? Like after the World War I don't think the Turkish people were happy with what they were given, and then they had their whole revolution and they carved out like different borders for themselves as well. And it seems like people accepted that, right?
Yeah, I guess it's just because the big difference would be, I don't even know how much of a difference is, because I guess Turkey still has problems with Kurds. But I guess the big difference with Palestine is that you've just got like this territory that was never formally like taken over in the same way that Turkey was, right? Like you still had this territory that was just kind of dangling. And at a particular point, there like the international community supported that. Like they still mostly do. They supported the idea of like a Palestinian state. So again, that's the kind of like might makes right a little bit, because it's like the international community says so. But where things go from now is like, I think honestly, the way that you're saying it is probably how it's most likely to go. I think the settlements are just going to keep expanding, and it is just going to be a very slow process of a gradual process of just more annexations in the West Bank until the point that like Palestinians are just kind of like either second-class citizens or they're just driven away somewhere else. That's probably the most likely, unfortunately. But I would like to imagine that there's a way to not do that.
Yeah, I don't know.
Like
I can understand for Palestinians being ass mad though, given that it does seem to be the case. Because I'd always heard too from Jewish people that like, well, there's conflicting claims on who owns the land and blah blah blah. But that does seem kind of bullshit, right? The first Aliyah was in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and Palestinian people had been there for thousands of years prior to that. So like, I don't even know if like Israelis have barely been there for, Jewish people have barely been there for 100 years. And in the first Aliyah wasn't even that many people. So I can see like the ass madness of like, what the we've been here for so long. But on the flip side of that, literally none other part of the world works that way. You don't ever get to say like, well, I actually own this land because my ancient peoples have been here. Like it just doesn't work that way anywhere in Europe, in America, in Asia, anywhere, right?
But that's also the reason that Jews do have a claim to that land. That they say, right? They say it's because we were there like first in ancient history.
Well, maybe, but it seems like there was a lot of work being put in to run around and convince Europeans, to run around and convince Americans that this Balfour guy, the Balfour guy, the Zionist movement, that there was a lot of work internationally to get other countries on board with like carving out some. So it wasn't like they just went there and were like, hey, look, we were here, give us this territory. Like it seems like they put in a lot of diplomatic work to try. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just saying, but like, it's not like it happened by accident.
No, definitely not by accident. Yeah, they did a lot of work to claim land that other people were living on. Unfortunately. But if you think about, I maybe need to look at details about this, but I know that after the Second World War, that Jews and Palestinians both fought on the side of the Allies for a period, but I think there was a issue where a lot of Jewish militias were allowed to stay formed and to keep their arms, whereas Palestinian ones weren't. I think there's maybe some discrepancy there. But so it's obvious that like the British did choose a side as well, and with the other forces too. I think also there's maybe this problem with the way that you categorize things is quite important, because people always jump between whether you call them Palestinians or Arabs, right? You ever notice that? There's like a kind of tension between. So I think initially it used to be called the Israeli-Arab conflict, because there was like this pan-Arab movement of like all these nationalist leaders in different Arab countries that one by one started to make more peaceful relations with Israel. And now it gets called the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, because Palestinians have been kind of like left alone for the most part, apart from like Iran backing Hamas and shit. So I think the way that you categorize it is quite important as well, because I think at the beginning of the state of Israel,
Palestinians not Arabs? Can you?
They are, but it's the way. Yeah, they are, but the way you categorize it is like. I think the big difference is that when you categorize them as Arabs specifically, there's this kind of like play on words that'll happen when Palestinians might say that, well, we were cleansed from our lands in 1948, and like that's why, and that crisis has never been solved. That's why they deserve some kind of right to go back. But then the Jewish or the Israeli response to that will be that, well, Jewish people were ethnically cleansed by Arabs in the Middle East, which is a little bit true, not entirely, but
that was another issue that I read was another thing that, so after the 6-Day War, there was obviously Jewish people around the world were really excited because their little team basically won a war, but apparently like, do you pronounce it pogrom or pogrom?
Pogrom.
Apparently there were pogroms like in countries all over the world then, in the Arab world against Jewish people as well, because a lot of Arab countries were mad. I would have to go back and look specifically.
Yeah, there was one in Iraq in the 40s. There was one I think there was a Nazi-inspired one in Algeria.
Algeria is one I remember reading about, yeah. That apparently, like, after that war, like, Jewish people all over the world just started to get shit on by Arabs as well. Yeah.
I mean, what should have happened, not that it matters now, what should have happened is that after World War II, the British or the French or the Spanish or whoever the fuck, just like Jews who were fleeing Germany and Eastern Europe could have found refuge in like a Western European country and like been like, yeah, and just like, or the US, right? That probably how it should have gone, just like, but obviously Europe, even Western Europe was too anti-Semitic to let that happen. So they were just all like shoved in, or even like the early Zionist ambition was actually to put them to like a more empty place like Madagascar or some shit.
There was one country, oh god,
or was it Uganda? No,
yeah, Uganda. I think it was Uganda, wasn't it? I feel like I feel like Uganda, Jewish. I think it was Uganda. Yeah, that they were originally going to go there.
Yeah. But I know, like, even your people in your chat are annoyed with it. They should have gone somewhere else. But, like, yeah, usually if you're fleeing somewhere, the best place to flee would be somewhere where you can actually go and stay, not where you have to, like, throw people off off of their places to establish your state, which that's what happened, you know? I think what should happen now, I think there are two things that Palestinians ultimately want that I do think they have like some right to, even if it's just for pragmatic reasons. I think the first thing that they want is like...
Okay, go for it. You said two legitimate claims you think that the Palestinians have?
Yeah, so the first one they want is like self-determination, or to end the Israeli occupation. I think the justification for that is that like at least most of international law agrees that it's illegal, and also just that they're like the demographic majority in that area, and the alternative to them having self-determination is expansion of settlements, more violations of human rights, more fucking economic choke. So yeah, just mostly because the alternative is worse. But the problem is there's not even anywhere near like a peace process or that kind of agreement coming close right now. I think even if you wanted to just make like a very quick thing now, even just to start going there, that would be like ending the settlements. And there probably would have to be some kind of like land swap with the very big settlements along the border that would have to go to Israel in exchange for like maybe land in the upper Galilee that's roughly kind of empty that can go to Palestine. So that's like one thing. The other thing that Palestinians want, and I think they're also morally entitled to, is right of return. Which is obviously the fact that 750,000 refugees from the 40s is now like 7 million. Their crisis has not really been solved. They just live as second-class citizens or like non-citizens in other countries. And I think that is ultimately, like, Israel did that, even though it was a while ago.
Sure.
But I think, obviously, the worry about that is that obviously 7 million people just getting yeeted back into Israel is probably never going to happen. It's very unlikely. But I think in the past, for those two demands, there have been peace processes on the table that involved land swaps and self-determination, and also involved at least Israel recognizing the right of return and then just implementing it in a negotiated way between the two groups. There have been proposals for that in the early 2000s, like Geneva was one of them, that had majority support on both sides at the time. It's just that one leader or the other on either side didn't want it.
I feel like I would have to go and read those proposals more specifically, but I feel like if that's the case, I feel like there must not have been that much popular support. Like, it must have been like 52% popular support. If one leader was able to stop something, like, it couldn't have been that popular, right? Like, for instance, here's something I can say. There was broad popular support in Ukraine for seeing itself as being a trading partner to the European Union. And that was attempted to have been stopped by one leader. And arguably that was a large part of the entire revolution, right? So that's if somebody's like, well, there was broad support, but one guy stopped it, I could believe it. But if you're telling me there's like broad support in Israel and Palestine for some peace agreement, but one leader stopped it, I feel like there's no way. I feel like there must have
obviously,
been.
Yeah. So it was like, I think, I can't remember if there are 3 accords, I think, in the early 2000s that were, that I thought on a practical level would have made sense. I think one was called TABI, one was called the Arab Peace Initiative, the other was called the Geneva Accords. I think a couple of them did have it would have been between like 55-60% support on both sides, and that support didn't last very long because of the violence, right?
Sure.
And the government, it was the Israeli government at the time, which was quite right wing, that rejected those. That didn't even want to entertain them. So it's like, but the problem is with that situation is that there's never going to be a peace process that both sides are like 80%
super excited with.
Yeah, but I think when you think of it right now and the amount of like suffering that's going on, that has gone on even in the last 20 years, I think there has to be a way for it to happen. Like, whether that somehow, I think there's been like some indication that the Israeli left is like coming back a little bit. It's a long way away. The most popular politician in Palestine right now is a guy called Marwan Barghouti. He's an Israeli prisoner. He is more popular than I think Hamas's leader right now. He is like has signaled support for like one of those peace accords as early as a few years ago. So it's not impossible, but like I said, the alternative is just that it's going to be just Israel, like you said, they're just going to wipe Palestine off the face of the earth. I think is the most likely outcome. Okay.
Well, wait, let me do one more barrage.
No, that initial thing you said, why can't Israel get all of it? Yeah, that's dumb as fuck. Yeah, that's the conclusion.
Why can't Israel get all of what?
Like Gaza and the West Bank, right?
I just mean like why shouldn't they be entitled to keep what they basically conquered?
Oh, wait, when you say what they conquered, do you mean, do you mean, because they still occupy the West Bank, do you mean that as well? Or did you mean just Israel, like the current borders of Israel?
After the 6-Day War, Israel seized it was the Golan Heights.
Yeah.
It was all of the West Bank, right?
Yep.
And it was is it the Sinai Peninsula?
Sinai Desert, yeah.
Okay. They gave back how is it? Sinai?
Sinai.
They gave back the Sinai, right? And they gave back, I should look at this on a map, fuck. Did they get back some of Gaza? They just have the Gaza Strip, right?
So they technically gave up Gaza, but they still occupy the airspace. They still control the border, most of the border. They still have, and they still control the maritime situation, and they control all the imports and exports.
Okay, gotcha. And then they currently control all of the West Bank, right? Like militarily and everything, and airspace and all that.
Yeah, so it's like, there's the Palestinian Authority that controls it's like 3 areas. There's area A, B, and C. That's why if you look at those, you ever seen those maps of Palestine the West Bank where it looks like this weird leopard print thing?
Nope, but go ahead.
It's just like a weird pattern of scattered dots. So there's like area A, which is controlled by the Palestinian Authority. Then there's Area B, which is shared control. Area C is Israeli controlled, which is 60% of the West Bank. So yeah.
Okay, wait. Here's a question. Why? Okay, wait. I'm sorry. So let me just hold on, because I'm looking at this thing about this. Why doesn't Israel just say, okay, Palestine can have the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, and then just get rid of it? What is the why are Israelis not okay with keeping what they have there, or?
Because there are 500,000 settlers in the West Bank, and they are basically their entire existence is upheld by Israel. Like
they cleared out all the settlers from the Gaza Strip in the early 2000s, didn't they?
Like 9,000 of them, yeah. And for Israelis, that was like a massive like national trauma. Like there were people fighting with the IDF and fucking.
Sure.
Yeah, they don't want to do that in the West Bank where there's 500,000 of them. Yeah.
Also, does anybody give a about? I never hear anything about this land to the south of like Gaza. Does anybody care about any of that, or is it just
the triangle?
Yeah, the thing separating I guess Jordan and Egypt or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a desert.
Does anybody care, or is it just?
There's like one Israeli town at the bottom corner, at the bottom tip of it, like that goes to the sea, but I don't know. I don't really know what it's. There's not much going on there.
Okay. I just don't hear much. It's a giant fucking desert. Gotcha.
Yeah.
I don't know how far behind I am. Are you guys on the part that I'm listening to where you're talking about the Israeli settlers in Gaza?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so remember that Russia, as they conquered things during the Soviet Union and whatnot, would import a ton of ethnic Russians into those regions to kind of do the same thing that Israel's doing. To
sure, and India, Modi did it too. Like, this is what everybody does, because as soon as you've got people living in an area, your claims to that land are very, very, very strong. This is like the way of the world, yeah.
Yep. Okay. Just wanted to add that in. Thank you. Bye.
Fine.
Wow. Yeah, so that's probably the big reason that they don't want to give out the West Bank is like there are 500,000 settlers who live there who depend on the state of Israel, and like the whole infrastructure is built around them, like going from they can go in and out of Israel freely, and like the road systems are built to support them and all that shit. So yeah, that's what they don't really want to let go of. And also because they would say it's a security thing. They think if they give any self-determination to Palestinians, the Palestinians will just use that self-determination to try to destroy Israel. Which even if that's the case, I don't know if that's a great argument, because I mean Palestinians attack Israelis anyway, and also because like countries can split off and still fight with each other. Like sure. India and Pakistan like split off and they fucking hate each other.
Is the warning that Palestinians would destroy Israel, or is the warning that Palestinians would just become a conduit through which the rest of the Middle East would destroy Israel?
Yeah, like Iran, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and also because the settlers who live there would probably get pretty fucked up. But yeah, living under a Palestinian majority. At least that's the assumption. Again, I don't really know how. If you have quite popular leaders and peace proposals that do have some level of popular support, I don't know why there can't be some kind of this was what they tried. They tried to have some kind of security arrangement that would eventually lead to Palestinian statehood. It's just they never did.
Yeah. Okay, wait. Hold that thought.
I will say this Geome guy in your YouTube chat saying that, well, Palestine rejected every peace agreement on its face. That's just not true, okay? I know that's a really popular talking point, but you can look up the Oslo Accords were accepted by the Palestinian leadership, the fucking Tabi Agreement was, the Arab Peace Initiative was, and the Geneva Convention were. They were rejected by Sharon, you dishonest find a bridge, Jesus. Sorry.
Wow.
All right.
A bridge, huh?
Just, that's a really popular talking point. It's just not entirely true. Where were we? What the fuck were we talking about? Oh, so you were asking why doesn't Israel just keep so you would call them the pre-67 borders, right? They give up West Bank, they give up Gaza. Did they keep the Golan Heights, I guess?
I feel like I haven't, again, to be careful, I haven't run enough into it, but I heard that the Golan Heights they consider to be an important part of their security. Because don't people shoot rockets and shit from them up there pretty constantly? Or I feel like I've read that at some point. I don't know if that's true or not.
Because of Syria, yeah, that's what they say, yeah.
Only point of interest in that desert part of the peninsula is not.
And I think it's Druze people. A lot of them live in the Golan Heights, so that's why they don't want Israel to be there. But I guess they don't really like Syria controlling it either. That's a really difficult one. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so you were saying giving up at least Gaza and the West Bank to Palestinians, right? Is that what you meant by control everything they conquered?
Oh yeah, I'm curious. Yeah, and looking at the map, why not just give up the West Bank? Yeah, but somebody said security.
there's a few reasons. It's because also so much of the West Bank was controlled by Israel, not just for their settlers, but also for fucking economic stuff like infrastructure. And the problem is that Israel either gives that up to Palestinians, which they don't want to do, or they keep that, and then you just have like a Palestinian state that can't, that has like no resources. So like a lot of the resource-rich areas of the West Bank are controlled by Israel. So that's, but yeah, I think that's like how it would have to happen is there'd probably have to be land swaps. They'd have to dismantle at least some of the settlements, the smaller ones, or definitely the outposts. And yeah, there'd have to be land swaps, but we're a long ways away from that. No one wants that anymore, apart from like, yeah. But that was what was potentially could have happened, like in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Okay, well,